want to talk about sustainability in a different way than it's commonly talked about, not as a matter of compliance or license to operate, although that is very important. Not as an ethical way to do business, although it is, and that's very important. But I'd like to talk about sustainability as a fundamental element of business strategy, contributing to business success and prosperity and brand, and the ability to navigate the risks of a very uncertain future that we face together. And business faces inexorable pressures in many different dimensions. Pardon me one second here. And just quickly to go through a few of them, we know this. We see the explosion of a global middle class, hundreds of millions of people moving into the middle class in China. This is driving demand for resources. It's a business opportunity, of course, but it's a pressure on planetary systems. The consuming class is growing enormously, big emerging markets with demands for cars and refrigerators and energy and protein and many other things that stress living systems. Rising demand in many dimensions, global food demand, you can see here both the growing population with growing income translates into growing demand for high quality foodstuffs, putting pressure on agricultural systems. We see pressure on water systems globally, where the demand is rising and the supply is not rising. So again, stressors that are both physical and economic, and will in many cases become security pressures as well. Fisheries, important to you, of course. We see the same kind of pattern where demand is rising and supply is falling. Every major fishery in the world has been in decline over decades. You've made some very important moves in this direction to solve that, but it's a problem that we all live with. And it was summarized very eloquently by John Holdren and Paul Ehrlich. Holdren is a presidential science advisor. Ehrlich is a professor at Stanford University, and I've changed their terminology a little bit, but the concept is that impact, environmental impact, I, is a function of population and affluence. More people with more money, more environmental impact. In general, we've created technologies, T, that meet human needs and mitigate some of these impacts, but add problems of their own in terms of energy demand and pollution and so forth. So we're in a situation of all three of these factors rising, driving impact even higher. There's a possibility, suggested by Ray Anderson of Interface Carpet, of a different kind of technology that becomes the divisor in the equation. Green technology, clean technology that can actually reduce those pressures. But we live in this matrix, in this equation every day, and you feel it in different ways in different parts of your life and business. And this translates to significant risk for business as well as society. Some examples, just one example of many we could cite is climate change and the rise in extreme weather events around the world. This chart just shows the United States, and you can see a rise in both the number and the economic cost of this. Is just the over billion-dollar weather events in the United States over the last several decades. And you can argue whether that's driven by the weather itself or by increasing settlement of humans in coastal and other vulnerable areas, but the trend is clear. And that's the short list. Here's even more of the list of some of the environmental and social governance, not the criteria that our friend from NASDAQ talked about before, but the fundamental risks to business viability and success and stability going forward. And I won't read it for you. You recognize many of these. This is the landscape that we operate in. And while there are many risks, these risks can also open up business opportunities for companies that have the foresight and the intelligence and the skill to navigate those risks and turn them into opportunities. This is a long discussion we can have. It's been the focus of our work for decades, but just to name a few: impact on cost and margins, efficiency that saves resources, also saves money and delivers economic benefit. We find that sustainability is a powerful, a powerful driver of innovation in organizations, innovating in industrial processes, in new materials, in offers made to the marketplace, in ways of doing business that all have significant economic value and social value within the organization, as well as outside the organization. Opportunities in terms of license to operate. This is a challenge to many companies as regulatory requirements and reporting requirements rise, as the expectations of the marketplace rise. Fourth, and tremendously important, is impact on brand and reputation. For most companies in the world today, the capital value of the companies is mostly intangibles, not tangibles. It's not the bricks and mortar that's on the financial statement, but it's the brand and reputation. It's very vulnerable. It can be lost very quickly in the case of crises, and it's difficult to build and rebuild. Recruitment and retention of employees, tremendously important. Anybody who's running a business knows how difficult it is and how expensive it is to recruit good people, and even more so to keep them or to replace them when they're lost. And we see around the world a growing preference of especially young employees, but really all across many employee classes, to work with companies that have meaningful ES&G commitments. It just makes it, recruiters go to colleges and find that the kids say, I'm working there, I'm working in that kind of company, or I'll find one that does. I won't work with one that doesn't satisfy that. And then in the realm of regulatory concerns, we talk about regulatory insulation. We advise our clients actually not to focus on complying with regulations, but to think about fundamental strategies that transcend or advance the regulations, that have you complying as a side effect, not a focus. The purpose is not to comply. The purpose is to do business in ways where that won't be a concern. And this becomes a way of navigating the question of risk and the inevitable surprises that I mentioned before. If you think about something like the restriction on hazardous substances regulation from the European Union a little over 10 years ago, 2005, when the EU said, we will no longer allow lead, cadmium, mercury, chromium in products being sold here. At that time, half of the global electronics industry was not prepared to comply with the European regulations. 1/3 of the industry's global market. We did a piece for the Wall Street Journal back in that year arguing that this was not just an environmental concern, but actually a violation of these companies' duty to their shareholders. Why? Because they weren't prepared for a major economic impact that they could see coming or could have seen coming. How do we know they could see it coming? Well, half was not ready to comply, half was ready to comply. The difference is that some of those companies, like Hewlett-Packard, who we worked with back in those days, could see how the laws of nature impacted human society and gave a predictor of where the regulations would go. And so rather than waiting for the regulations to force them to move, they moved ahead of the market and had economic success as well as sustainability success.